Honda built its entire reputation on one word: reliability. For decades, "If it's a Honda, it'll run forever" wasn't just a marketing slogan. It was a fact backed by hundreds of thousands of miles on odometers all over the world. The B Series, the K Series, the legendary D Series economy engines. These power plants turned Honda into a brand that gearheads and grandparents could agree on. But here's the uncomfortable truth that Honda fanboys don't like to admit. Not every engine that left the factory in Marysville, Ohio, or Suzuka, Japan, deserved to wear the H badge. Somewhere between the golden era of naturally aspirated VTEC screamers and today's turbocharged, downsized, emissions-choked lineup, Honda made some engineering decisions that turned reliable daily drivers into ticking time bombs. Rod knock, oil dilution, head gasket failures, cracked blocks. These aren't words you're supposed to associate with Honda. And yet, for a handful of engines, they became common knowledge on every enthusiast forum and every independent mechanic shop floor. Today we're doing something a little different. Number 7. Honda F22A1/F23A1. We're starting our worst of list with an engine that broke a lot of hearts in the mid-90s, because it came from an era when Honda could seemingly do no wrong. The F22 and its later F23 replacement powered the 5th generation Accord, a car that was otherwise a masterclass in mid-sized sedan engineering, tight chassis, excellent visibility, a manual transmission that felt like it was carved from a single block of billet aluminum. But under the hood sat an engine with a design flaw that would define its reputation for the next 3 decades: catastrophic head gasket failure, almost always accompanied by cracked cylinder heads. The root cause traces back to Honda's head bolt design and torque specifications on this generation of engine. The head bolts on the F22 and F23 simply didn't clamp the head to the block with enough even pressure, and over time, especially in engines that saw stop-and-go traffic, hot climates, or owners who skipped coolant flushes, the head gasket would begin to weep coolant into the combustion chamber. What made this worse than a typical head gasket failure on other engines is that it rarely stayed a simple, fixable problem. By the time most owners noticed the telltale white smoke out the tailpipe or the slowly dropping coolant level, the aluminum cylinder head itself had already started to warp or crack around the exhaust valve seats, particularly cylinders 3 and 4, which ran hottest. A basic head gasket replacement, already a few $100s in labor, often turned into a full head replacement or resurfacing job that could run well over $1,000 on a car that in the late 90s and early 2000s wasn't worth much more than that on the used market. Independent mechanics in Honda heavy markets got so used to seeing F22 and F23 Accords roll in with the exact same symptoms that some shops started quoting head gasket jobs before the customer even finished describing the problem. Honda never issued a formal recall for this issue, which frustrated owners even more. It was treated as a known issue you dealt with out of pocket rather than a manufacturer defect Honda was willing to own. The bitter irony is that everything else about this engine family was solid. The bottom end was tough. The SOC VTEC variant, available on EX trims, was a genuinely enjoyable engine to drive, and fuel economy was respectable for the era. It's specifically the head gasket and head cracking issue that earns this engine a permanent spot on Honda's worst of list. If you're shopping for a 90s Accord today as a cheap classic or project car, this is the single most important thing to inspect before you hand over any cash. Check for coolant contamination in the oil, look for white residue around the coolant reservoir cap, and always ask for maintenance records showing regular coolant changes. Because on this engine, coolant maintenance wasn't optional. It was the difference between a car that lasted and a car that left you stranded. Number 6. Honda J35Y6 with VCM. Our number 2 spot goes to an engine that represents one of Honda's most controversial technology decisions of the last 2 decades: variable cylinder management, or VCM, paired with the J35Y6 3.5-liter V6 found in the 3rd generation Odyssey minivan and contemporary pilot SUVs. On paper, VCM was a smart idea. The system could deactivate cylinders under light load, running on 6, 4, or even 3 cylinders depending on demand, to improve fuel economy without sacrificing power when you actually needed it. It's the same basic concept GM used with active fuel management and Chrysler used with its multi-displacement system. But in practice, Honda's implementation of VCM on this generation of J35 engine turned into one of the most consistent sources of engine failure the brand has ever produced. The core problem was oil control. When VCM deactivated cylinders, it changed oil flow and pressure dynamics throughout the engine in ways Honda's engineers hadn't fully accounted for, and over tens of thousands of miles this led to excessive oil consumption, carbon buildup in the deactivated cylinders, and, in the worst cases, spun rod bearings and full rod knock. Owners reported engines that were burning a quart of oil every 1,000 miles or less. Engines that developed a persistent knocking sound on cold start that mechanics couldn't fully diagnose without tearing into the bottom end. And in a disturbing number of cases, complete engine failure well before 100,000 miles on vehicles that were otherwise meticulously maintained. This wasn't a fringe complaint either. It became one of the most discussed reliability issues on Odyssey and Pilot owner forums for that entire generation, with owners comparing notes on oil consumption logs and VCM-related symptoms as if they were tracking a slow-motion recall Honda never officially issued. Honda did extend some engine warranties in specific cases and issued technical service bulletins addressing rod bearing wear on affected VIN ranges, but there was never a full transparent recall acknowledging the scope of the problem, which left a lot of owners footing five-figure engine replacement bills on vehicles that were supposed to be the dependable family hauler. The frustrating part is that the non-VCM version of Honda's J-Series V6 has an excellent reputation, smooth, torquey, and durable across multiple Accord, Pilot, and Odyssey generations. It's specifically this VCM-equipped iteration, chasing EPA fuel economy numbers, that tarnished the family name. If you're looking at a used 2011-2017 Odyssey or Pilot today, an oil consumption test and a cold start listen for knock should be non-negotiable steps before purchase, because this engine turned Honda's flagship minivan into a genuine reliability gamble during a period when nobody expected that from the brand. Number 5. Honda L15B 7 1.5L Turbo. And the number one spot on our worst list, the engine that generated more lawsuits, forum threads, and dealership complaints than arguably any other engine Honda has built in the modern era, goes to the L15B7, the 1.5-liter turbocharged four-cylinder found in the 10th generation Civic and 5th generation CR-V. This engine represented Honda's entry into the small displacement turbo era, downsizing from bigger, naturally aspirated fours to chase better EPA fuel economy ratings while still claiming decent power output. Unfortunately, it also imported a problem that plagued it from nearly day one. Severe oil dilution from unburned gasoline seeping past the piston rings and into the crankcase, particularly in cold climates and during short trip driving cycles where the engine never fully reached optimal operating temperature. Owners in colder states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Northeast, reported dipsticks that smelled overwhelmingly of raw gasoline and oil levels that were visibly rising above the full mark rather than dropping. A bizarre and alarming reversal of the oil consumption problems that usually plague aging engines. Diluted oil doesn't lubricate properly, which meant accelerated wear on bearings, camshafts, and other critical components, all while the check engine light frequently stayed dark because the onboard diagnostics weren't calibrated to catch it. This became such a widespread issue that it spawned a class action lawsuit against Honda in the United States, ultimately resulting in extended warranty coverage and, for some owners, reimbursement for oil changes and diagnostic work. Honda issued multiple software updates attempting to adjust the engine's fuel injection timing and warm-up cycle to reduce dilution, and later production years saw meaningful improvement. But the early production 2016 and 2017 models in particular developed a reputation that followed the Civic and CR-V for years afterward. What made this especially painful for Honda was the context. This was happening on the Civic, the car most responsible for building Honda's reliability reputation among American buyers since the 1970s, and on the CR-V, one of the best-selling crossovers in the country. A generation of buyers who trusted Honda blindly because of decades of goodwill suddenly found themselves Googling Honda oil dilution and discovering they weren't alone. If you're shopping for an early 10th Gen Civic or 5th Gen CR-V, the used market has largely priced this risk in, but you should absolutely confirm which software revision the engine has received and, ideally, avoid vehicles that spent their life exclusively on short suburban trips in cold climates. Because that's the exact driving pattern that turned this engine into Honda's biggest reliability black eye of the last 20 years. Number 4. Honda D16Y8. Now let's talk about the engines that made Honda's reputation in the first place, starting with a humble little four-cylinder that never won a single magazine comparison test on outright power, but earned something arguably more valuable, unshakable, almost boring reliability. The D16Y8, found in the 6th generation Civic EX, wasn't built to be exciting. It was a single-cam, 16-valve, VTEC-equipped 1.6-liter putting out a modest 127 horsepower, and it existed to do one job supremely well: get people to work and back for 200,000 miles without complaint. What made the D16Y8 special wasn't cutting-edge engineering. It was Honda's obsessive attention to the fundamentals. Simple, well-understood cast iron block construction. Conservative tuning that never pushed internal components anywhere near their stress limits. A timing belt interval that, if actually followed, virtually guaranteed you'd never experience catastrophic valve damage. This is an engine that mechanics genuinely loved working on, not because it needed constant attention, but because when it did need something, the fix was usually cheap, well-documented, and straightforward. No exotic parts, no dealer-only diagnostic tools, no surprises. Ask anyone who owned a 90s or early 2000s Civic and they'll tell you some version of the same story. Bought it used with 80,000 miles already on it, drove it through college, handed it down to a sibling, and it was still running when it finally got sold or scrapped north of 250,000 miles, usually done in by rust or a transmission issue rather than the engine itself. The D16Y8 also became the foundation of an entire subculture. This is the engine that launched 1,000 first car projects. The platform tuners cut their teeth on before graduating to be Series and K-Series swaps. Because it was so common and so well understood, the aftermarket support for the D-Series was enormous, which meant even when something did eventually go wrong, parts were cheap and plentiful. Fuel economy was another quiet strength. In an era before hybrid technology was mainstream, a D16Y8 Civic returning 35+ miles per gallon on the highway with basic carbureted-era simplicity felt almost magical to owners coming out of less efficient domestic compacts. This engine never generated headlines, never appeared on anyone's dream car poster, and that's exactly the point. It represents the unglamorous backbone of Honda's reputation, the millions of units that just worked, day after day, commute after commute, without ever making the news for the wrong reasons. In an industry where the loudest engines get all the attention, the D16Y8 is a reminder that the best engineering is often the kind you never have to think about, and that's precisely why it earns its spot on this list. Number 3. Honda J35A4 Non-VCM V6. Sitting in direct contrast to its problematic VCM-equipped cousin from earlier in this video, the non-VCM version of Honda's J-Series 3.5-liter V6, specifically the J35A4 found in mid-2000s Accords and Odysseys, represents everything Honda does right when it commits to a naturally aspirated, mechanically straightforward engine design. This is a genuinely underrated power plant in enthusiast circles, mostly because V6 family sedans and minivans don't generate the same kind of internet buzz as a Type R or an NSX. But talk to any longtime Honda technician and they'll tell you this engine family is a tank. The J35A4 produces a smooth 255 horsepower without any forced induction trickery, using a single overhead cam design per bank, a timing belt that Honda engineered with a genuinely reasonable 105,000-mile replacement interval, and a bottom end that was simply overbuilt relative to the power it was producing. That's the recurring theme with Honda's best engines. They rarely operate anywhere near their true limits in stock form, which leaves enormous reliability margin for owners who maintain them properly. Odyssey minivans running this engine routinely crossed 200,000 and 250,000 miles hauling families, cargo, and trailers without major engine work, and the same engine in the Accord became a favorite of rideshare and taxi drivers precisely because it could handle the kind of relentless daily mileage that would destroy a lesser design. Part of what makes this engine so impressive is how quiet and refined it is in operation. Honda's engineers tuned the intake and exhaust harmonics carefully enough that this V6 delivers genuine luxury car smoothness at idle and under load, something that wasn't a given in mainstream V6 sedans of that era. Oil consumption on well-maintained examples remains minimal even past 150,000 miles, a stark contrast to the VCM version that would arrive just a few years later chasing fuel economy numbers at the expense of durability. Independent mechanics frequently point to this specific J35 variant as one of the safest high-mileage used engine bets in Honda's entire lineup, right alongside the four-cylinder K-Series engines from the same era. It's not flashy, it doesn't have a cult following with matching merchandise, and you won't see it referenced in rap lyrics the way the B-Series or K-Series sometimes are, but from a pure engineering and longevity standpoint, the non-VCM J35A4 deserves to be mentioned in the same breath as Honda's most celebrated four-cylinders. It's proof that Honda's reliability reputation wasn't built exclusively on small economy cars. When Honda built a V6 the traditional way, without gimmicks layered on top, they built one of the best family hauler engines of the 2000s, full stop. Number 2. Honda B18C Type R. Our number 2 spot belongs to an engine that enthusiasts still talk about in almost reverent tones decades after it stopped being produced. The B18C found specifically in the Integra Type R. While the broader B-Series family powered everything from base Civics to Preludes throughout the 90s, the Type R variant of the B18C represented Honda's engineers being given the green light to build something with almost no compromise, and the result is widely considered one of the greatest naturally aspirated four-cylinders ever mass-produced. This 1.8-liter engine produced an astonishing 195 to 197 horsepower, depending on market, which meant it was making over 100 horsepower per liter from a naturally aspirated engine with no turbo or supercharger, a specific output figure that remains genuinely impressive even by today's standards, decades before most manufacturers achieved similar numbers without forced induction. Honda achieved this through a combination of techniques that became legendary in tuning circles: hand-ported cylinder heads, individually balanced and blueprint internals, a higher revving VTEC profile that didn't kick in until deep in the rev range, and a redline that pushed past 8,000 revolutions per minute, an almost motorcycle-like characteristic for a production road car engine. But what truly separates the B18C Type R from other high-output engines of its era is how it managed to combine that race engine character with genuine, everyday reliability. Owners who track their Integra Type RS regularly, redlining the engine lap after lap, still reported these engines lasting well past 150,000 and 200,000 miles with nothing more than routine maintenance. This is an engine that was engineered to be revved hard as a matter of daily operation, not something that merely tolerated hard driving. The entire design philosophy assumed the owner would use that 8,000 revolutions per minute redline regularly, and Honda built in a durability margin to match that assumption. The VTEC engagement point itself became a cultural touchstone. The audible shift in intake note and the surge of power when the secondary cam lobes engaged around 5,700 revolutions per minute is one of the most replicated and referenced sounds in tuning culture, sampled in videos and celebrated on forums for over 2 decades now. Beyond the raw numbers, the B18C Type R engine paired with the rest of the Integra Type R package, a helical limited slip differential, stiffened chassis, and close ratio gearbox, to create a front-wheel drive driving experience that automotive journalists at the time argued rivaled far more expensive rear-wheel drive sports cars in outright driver engagement. Clean, unmodified examples of this engine today command genuinely serious money on the used market, not out of nostalgia alone, but because nothing else quite replicates that specific combination of high-revving naturally aspirated character and bulletproof Honda durability. It stands as proof of what Honda's engineers were capable of when given the freedom to build a genuine enthusiast engine without a single compromise for cost or mass-market appeal. Number 1. Honda F20C. And there was only ever one real contender for the top spot. The F20C, the engine Honda built specifically for the original S2000 Roadster, and quite possibly the single greatest naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine any manufacturer has ever put into full production. To understand why this engine holds a nearly mythical status among enthusiasts, you have to start with the specific output figure that still stuns people today: 240 horsepower from just 2.0 liters of naturally aspirated displacement. A specific output of 120 horsepower per liter that set a production car record at the time of its release and remained unmatched by any naturally aspirated engine for years afterward. To put that in context, that's a specific output figure that many turbocharged engines struggle to match even today, and Honda achieved it entirely without forced induction, relying instead on a redline that reached a genuinely absurd 9,000 revolutions per minute, higher than most motorcycle engines of the era. Every component inside the F20C was engineered around that redline. A forged crankshaft designed specifically for high RPM durability, titanium connecting rods in later revisions, individual throttle bodies for razor-sharp throttle response, and a VTEC system tuned to deliver a genuinely dramatic transformation in character once the engine crossed into its high RPM VTC zone, where it seemed to inhale and come alive in a way that 4-cylinder engines simply weren't supposed to. What makes the F20C's inclusion on this list even more remarkable is that Honda somehow achieved all of this without sacrificing the durability that defines the brand. Despite operating at redlines that would destroy lesser engines within a few thousand miles, well-maintained F20C and later F22C engines routinely surpass 150,000 and even 200,000 miles, including plenty of examples that spent significant track time being redlined lap after lap. This is an engine that racing enthusiasts and Honda engineers alike still hold up as the definitive proof of what naturally aspirated engineering could achieve before the entire industry shifted toward turbocharging and downsizing for emissions and efficiency reasons. The F20C didn't just power a fun weekend roadster. It became the benchmark against which every subsequent high-revving 4-cylinder was measured, influencing engine design conversations at Honda and rival manufacturers for years afterward. Even today, more than 2 decades after the S2000 went out of production, the F20C remains a coveted engine among tuners and collectors, with clean, low-mileage examples of the car commanding steadily rising prices specifically because nothing else feels quite like it. It represents the absolute peak of what Honda's engineers were capable of during the company's golden era of naturally aspirated performance engineering. A perfect, uncompromised combination of screaming high RPM excitement and the bulletproof, long-term reliability that built Honda's reputation in the first place. If you ever get the chance to experience that engine crossing 6,000 revolutions per minute and feel the VTC kick hit, you'll understand immediately why it earns the #1 spot on this list, and why so many enthusiasts consider it the single greatest engine Honda has ever built.